Well, then let's go ahead. Steve, why don't you get us started?
Good morning. We are in October, and
I know, my birthday month.
Nikki's birthday
Happy
month.
birthday.
Happy
So-
birthday, Nikki.
Thank you. I
happy
celebrate
birthday.
the entire month, so we'll have to do that every Wednesday.
Very, very excited to share. Yes, right. A new person to the world, and with that, we want to welcome everyone. We are picking up where we left off in regards to the Office of Inspector General and how the processes work in police departments. And now we're kind of giving a shift from that perspective to the Department of Public Safety. And of course, he has ridden along with us admirably, a fighting Texas Aggie. I knew that his presence was going to be needed today, so I proudly and neutrally display because I recognize both major institutions, but the land grant institution, the Texas A&M University over in Bryan-College Station area. Clay Taylor is the executive director of the DPS Officers Association, will give us the general scenario when it comes to the state troopers and what process they go about in general. We don't want to bog down in the detail, but Clay, if you would, we'd like to hear from you on that. And then we would set the stage for specific cases to be talked about. And as we embark on those specific cases, we will pick cases that will have some breadth and depth to their existence, so that even though there are things that have happened here in the month of October 2020, even in Texas, to allow things to unfold, to get more information. And of course, what I appreciate is the balancing test of what we definitely need to get out to the public to deter civil unrest, and also allow the processes of law enforcement and the legal system to run its course as well. So we will address that after Clay Taylor gets an opportunity here now to talk to us about the DPS and their processes with the OIG complaints and that.
Thank you, Stephen. So I think where we left off was any piece of paper that a trooper produces, whether it be a citation or warning, that piece of paper has, like most agencies, at the bottom of the citation, a route that the person who's come into contact with the trooper can complain if they have a complaint. You can go on our website, dps.texas.gov, and you can find either there's a bullet there that talks about complaint investigations, or there's a search engine that allows you to, you just type how to file a complaint. It'll send you to any number of pages. So with that said,
I want to point out, Clay, let me point out, it also, the same process can be used to commend the officer as well.
Absolutely. It says complaint or compliment, I believe, at the bottom of the citation or warning. And all those are computer generated as well. So with that said, if you want to file a complaint on the officer, you go, there's one of several ways that you can do it. The caveat is the complaint has to be in writing. It can be sent via U.S. mail, email, you can fax it in, and it has to have a signature on it. But if you go on the website, they'll give you step-by-step instructions on how to do that complaint. When I started, they were called Internal Affairs. Now they're called the Office of Inspector General. And the significance of that is, while they are department employees, they aren't responsible to the chain of command per se, except that what their decision process is the final authority is generally the director. And then if the person who's been filed on for the complaint has an appeal process, that hearing is held by the Public Safety Commission. Public Safety Commission is a body of 5 to 7 people who are appointed by the governor of the state of Texas. So with that said, there's an address on there where you can file the complaint. That OIG will hear any complaint and will investigate any complaint, with the exception of whether or not the sole decision is to decide your innocence or guilt in either a traffic or a criminal charge. So, and then they also, if you go on the website, they actually publish their annual reports. I'm looking right now at the latest report that's published by the OIG is in 2018. And if you go into that, it's a PDF file, but it will tell you just by the numbers. In 2018, out of 10,000 employees, DPS had a complaint rate of 0.11%. And then they'll go down and they'll break those complaints down into what they were. I haven't read through the entire report, but it will tell you step by step what they were and how those were resolved.
Is my math right? That means 110 complaints in a year against 10,000 employees.
Something like that. Yeah, I'd done the math either, but that's pretty low. I mean, I think most agencies would be very happy to have that. So if you go to the website, it shows you how to file a complaint. It also suggests that you read before you file the complaint a title that's called Complaint Investigation Resolution. And if you go into that, it's a very detailed explanation. But generally speaking, there are 2 types of complaints that OIG will investigate. They're going to investigate an infraction by a DPS employee of the department rules, regulations, policies, things of that nature. And what I mean by that is, for example, DWI, you're intoxicated if you're guilty of DWI if you're intoxicated, or if you have 0.08 blood alcohol concentration. Whereas our policy would say you can't operate a state vehicle if you have any trace of alcohol in your system. So that's the difference between a violation of law versus a violation of policy. But the OIG will investigate infractions of our department rules, our regulations, and our policies, and then, of course, any illegal act.
Did you know Steve's response to that, by the way? He's like, man, I got a trace alcohol in my system right now.
No, I mean, of course, we're on, unlike a lot of city agencies that provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coverage, when you leave the metropolitan areas, 80% of our troopers, probably 90% of our troopers outside of major metropolitan areas, we don't work 24 hours a day. So we have a call structure.
Right.
And so when that night unit goes in at 2 or 4 in the morning, then the day unit that's on call for Rex starts taking that call. Well, the policy says if you're a call unit, then you can't partake in any alcohol if you're subject to call. Of course, like most agencies, we have, especially with 2020, we have. It seems like there's a call up every day for something. But so with those 2 things said, our policy states that the investigation of a formal complaint is going to include the person who contacted, who made the complaint, what they're accusing our employee of, any witnesses that are available that they know of, any recording devices that they know were taken, and of course, the obvious rule is that if it's a state marked unit, if it's a black and white, a trooper, he's going to have a recording device. He's going to have a mobile video in his car. They're going to they'll take that sworn statement from whoever the accuser is, and then they'll obtain any legal evidence if it's needed, and then investigate it and give a detailed investigative report. So the purpose of that is to come to a conclusion by the OIG's office. And there are one of 4 outcomes of those complaints. It's either unfounded, meaning that it's false. They're exonerated, meaning that the incident occurred but was lawful and proper. not sustained, meaning there's not enough evidence to provide or prove or disprove the allegation. And then, of course, the sustained one means that there was sufficient evidence for that. And then based on those 4 attributes, there's 6 outcomes. There's the trooper, the ranger, the CID investigator, or the employee can get a formal written reprimand. He can be put on disciplinary probation, time off without pay, reduction of salary, demoted, and then, of course, the big one is discharge. So all of that, I say all that to say that during that entire investigation, the employee that's being complained on has to comply with OIG. He or she does have a final appeal that I talked about earlier, where they can appeal it to the director, and the director can either support or give an arbitrary ruling. And if they don't like that, then they can appeal it to the Public Safety Commission, and the Public Safety Commission is the final authority.
And the Public Safety Commission is a group of citizens that are appointed by the governor.
Yeah, it's a body of, I think it's five. We've had as many as 7 on there in the past, but it's generally 5, and they're all appointed by the governor.
They're appointed by the governor. How does that appointment work? What do they look at in order to get appointed? Or is there some kind of process in that? Or do you know?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, but they do go through an investigation by somebody. I'm at a loss for who does that, but yeah, they're appointed by the governor. I don't know what the process is.
I can help out a little bit there. There are specific standards that are set out in the government code about who can be appointed to those positions, and the governor actually has an appointments office, a team of employees who go through all those applications, potential appointments. Sometimes they actually recruit people for these positions, but there's an office in the governor's staff that does all that work.
Yeah, and
you're
so
oftentimes looking for new people too. So Nikki, if that's something you're interested in, not being facetious, you should really go ahead and look at the list, what you're interested in, and put your name on it.
Yeah. So and one final
Thank you, Rudy.
one final thing on that is that a final conclusion on the complaint investigation has to be if it has a 90-day window that it needs to be complete. If the investigator sees that it's not going to meet that 90-day standard, then they have to notify the Public Safety Commission or the director or deputy director, whoever's in charge at that point, that of the reasons why it's not going to be completed.
And I might have missed this last week, or this may sound like a dumb question, but can you advise which complaints would come? Do all complaints go through the DPS, or which ones would actually be the ones that would trigger an investigation or the complaint process or commendation process through the department that you were just referencing versus local?
Well, so in addition to so if I stop somebody and they allege that I violated, we'll just say I made a violation of their civil rights, that would, if they complain through our process, then obviously OIG is going to take it over. But the OIG will also take referrals. In other words, if you go to Dallas PD and say, hey, this trooper stopped me and he did this or she did this, and Dallas PD, you're not aware of how to contact DPS. Dallas PD can do that for you, and OIG will take that as a referral.
This is simply the process, Nikki, for complaints about DPS troopers and officers and employees.
Okay.
Yes, DPS does get involved in investigations of officers at local agencies, but that is typically going to be either the special crimes section, depending on what type of allegations are made, or the Texas Rangers, who are very often asked to come in and investigate, especially officer-involved shootings. Very often, and any district attorney or any other agency head can invite the rangers to come in and conduct those investigations.
Yeah, the
Okay.
Rangers are other than OIG, the Rangers are a major crime investigative unit.
And we've lost Steve.
I know. How convenient.
So I would point out, though, that like most law enforcement agencies, ultimately there is civilian oversight. There is a civilian, review of some kind. With DPS, it is the Public Safety Commission. In Irving, where Travis works, it is both the Irving Civil Service Commission, which is a group of citizens that are appointed by the city manager and approved by the city council. And then there's the city council, who are elected by the citizens. When I say most agencies, not all law enforcement agencies report directly to a civilian board, because some law enforcement officers work for constitutionally elected officials, sheriffs and constables, and they don't really answer to the commissioner's court. They do for budgetary items, but not for disciplinary items. So if a deputy sheriff or a deputy constable is disciplined based upon whether it's a complaint from a citizen or not, the final say is with that elected official. And there's no appeal beyond that to any civilian board at all.
Now that's really interesting, right? I don't think that's something that most people realize, is that it's very different if that officer, the peace officers, just like you said, under the city council or commissioners, but if it's under a sheriff or somebody else, then that's the end all be all, whether or not that person's going to have his or her say in any sort of disciplinary procedures.
Right. Unless that particular county has adopted some form of process, whether if they've adopted civil service under Chapter 158 of the Local Government Code, or if they've adopted collective bargaining under Chapter 174, and that would have to be voted in by the citizens in that county. And I'd be guessing, but I'd say there's probably less than 15 counties across the state that either one of those applies to. So the other 240 or so don't have any kind of oversight.
I was about to say, don't we have 254 counties in the state of Texas?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
we even include Travis County in that.
So let me ask you this. What's the reason behind that? Is it that there's a concern with the concern with the statute, concern with the application of the statute, concern with what due process would actually look like, or why hasn't that been adopted?
Well, you have to understand, there was none of that until the late 1960s or into the 1970s, where there was any process by which the voters at the local level could institute either civil service or collective bargaining at counties. Civil service for cities started back in the 1940s, but for counties it didn't, the genesis didn't start until the 1970s. And of course, constables and sheriffs are constitutionally created offices. They are in the Texas Constitution. So the legislature has a little less leeway in dealing with, creating any kind of oversight for those particular positions. I've argued many times, I believe the entire county form of government in Texas, we need to just blow it up and start over. It is so archaic and out of date. We need to just start over. But we've got a constitution that's been around for close to 200 years now. And of course, it's been amended, 200 and some odd times now, Steve.
Yeah, I think yeah. And Rudy, I think you may have missed it. Kevin did mention those statistics probably about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And I remember going, wait a minute, because then we started talking about the model rules and ways of trying to adopt these things. So we had a consistency across the board in the state. But I was very kind of taken because I recalled it, and I was like, you know what? That is a very small amount given we have 254 counties.
Yeah, and the difference is obviously if you work for a municipal law enforcement agency, if you work for the city of Irving or the city of College Station, whether they are civil service or not, whether they have collective bargaining or not, they still answer to the city council, to a group of citizens elected by the citizens.
Right.
And in counties, they work for one person who's elected by the citizens, I grant you that, but there's not a committee of citizens that oversee that.
And remember that when we're talking about civil service, that's something that went to the voters and they elected for that city or county to have that.
Right. It's adopted by referendum at the local level.
Do they recognize the process or actually what that means, though? And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just wondering if the recognition is as such because they have elected that means of oversight.
I can tell you of the elections at the local referendums that have been held for civil service over the last 20 years, it is always a very information-filled process. There are lots of neighborhood, group meetings that we go to, and a lot of debate back and forth about the pros and cons of civil service. And I'd say in the last 20 years, about half of them have passed and about half of them have failed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I know I was working with the civil service area of the statute in 2017 and was talking with you, Kevin, about that because I know that we had the sheriffs and we had varying groups supporting and not supporting that change in the statute. And I know it got very heated from the sheriffs saying that, if you're doing this, you kind of usurp what we've had. And I don't recall the exact issue specifically, but I know it was a seesaw back and forth about, people got real particular and very passionate about making these changes. And so we were close at one time, and then at the end, it just never materialized. And I know it was a cleat-based thing that they were looking at, but it's an issue that can fall and cut both ways, and some like it and some don't.
Right. And there are two sides to every debate.
Yes. Yeah. And it gets very heated in law enforcement. So, amongst law enforcement, that's not even, we're looking at issues that affect the community and law enforcement, but within law enforcement itself. And you had made mention of that, I think, when we initially spoke, that you and Doug and others may have different perspectives within law enforcement and how you go about certain processes. And so it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and you also have to understand 2,700 different law enforcement agencies across the state of Texas, and they range from departments that have one single officer all the way up to DPS that has 10,000 employees, and the Houston Police Department that employs 5,500 police officers. So there's this full gamut of different.
What's an example of a one officer scenario?
Well, the elected constable of Precinct 4 in Lampasas County.
Yeah.
That would be a one-person department.
Wow.
You might have, a water control district that has their own police department. There are hundreds of one-officer departments across the state of Texas.
Wow.
Literally hundreds of them.
Did not know that. Did not know that.
Me neither.
You also have those well-known speed traps that may start out as a one-man police department, but as revenue grows, so does the police department.
Okay.
And most people don't know, but more than half of all the law enforcement agencies in the state of Texas employ fewer than 10 officers.
Yeah.
Wow. It just makes you try to, when you're looking at solving some of the issues as law enforcement interacts with citizenry, if you can recognize that half of the departments are 10 or less, is it sensible and reasonable, as we would say on our side of the coin, is it reasonable to have distinctions in some senses for those groups of law enforcement in that size, a medium size, and then a large size? However, when it comes to the interaction, and I think use of force could be with that person in Precinct 4 in Lampasas County to all the way up to Harris County, is some uniformity when you have the interaction with the citizen. Could that be uniform from 1 to 5,000 plus law enforcement personnel? Can we find uniformity there that may differentiate between the sizes of 10 or less, 10 to 1,000, and then 1,000 and more. You know how we bracket things in the legislature, Kevin.
In theory, it sounds like a wonderful idea. In practice, it's almost impossible to do, because when you really think about how big the state of Texas is and how many different, I mean, I saw something in the news the other day talked about the 7 different countries that exist within the state of Texas, because we're just that diverse.
Well, we can break up into 5 states, but you said 7, so that's very interesting.
That doesn't really exist, but it really is, because if you think about it, you have places like Edwards County, Texas. Edwards County, as far as I know, does not have one single incorporated city inside of it. Okay, so if you need law enforcement in Edwards County, you're calling the sheriff's office or one of those constables that we're talking about, or the highway patrol. And it just depends on how long it's going to take them to respond. Years ago, we were on our way to El Paso. We stopped in Fort Stockton, Texas, to visit an old friend of mine. And we're having dinner with him, and he's talking about how, they might have to go out and back up the sheriff's department if there's a call outside the city, because there's so few officers in the entire county. And I said, well, just out of curiosity, how far will you go? Because at the time I'm working in Baytown. And if we got 100 yards outside the city, we had to get permission from a sergeant, I said, how far will you go outside the city to back up the county? He goes, it depends on how busy we are, what all's going on. We might go 80, 90 miles.
Yeah.
Now think about that. How long does it take you to go 80 or 90 miles, even if you're running hot, red lights and sirens? That's an emergency call. How long are you willing to wait for a response if you're the person calling for law enforcement? So if you live in one of those little communities in that county outside of Fort Stockton, don't you want your own local police force?
You do, but I would, at least I would gather that you would want some uniformity in the interaction with citizenry, regardless if you have that local law enforcement person, or if you have someone like your friend who transports themselves 80 miles. The uniformity across Texas should be great, or at least greatly balanced in Edwards County or Fort Stockton as much as Travis County, Austin, or Houston, right? I mean, that's what I think. I'm speaking with the group, but I'm speaking for myself as we've gone through this, and I think it's a great exercise of thought. I don't want to be treated differently in Edwards County than I do in Travis County. I don't want to be treated different in Fort Stockton than I would be in the Central Business District of Houston. I don't want an unfamiliar face as I head to El Paso to go home to be stopped in Fort Stockton, and because maybe there's not a lot of minority population out there or Black population, I somehow am treated as not the same as a citizen of the state. And I think that's where uniformity would call for having all professionals be at a minimum level of interaction, respect with all the citizens.
And having worked in the legislature as you have, you understand the whole concept of, and Rudy being a city council member knows this as well, when the state starts handing down unfunded mandates, local agencies, local governmental entities start pushing back against that. There's a huge difference between if you work for the city of Austin, where officers, I think, start, once they finish the academy and their basic training, they're starting at something north of $50,000 a year, whereas some of those other cities we're talking about in West Texas are paying $12.50 an hour. If you don't have the resources to put into, creating that uniformity that you're talking about, it makes a huge difference. And the state has never, I don't know that the state has had the proper impetus to fund that kind of uniformity either.
Well, if we all have computers, right? And this goes back to what Rudy had mentioned earlier.
No, we don't. We still got law enforcement agencies in the state that don't have computers. They have to borrow ask Clay.
So maybe some of the influence at Dell and Hewlett Packard needs to get to support. My point being, you have cell phones.
But this is a computer.
Yeah.
But Stephen, you've been to, if you're from El Paso, you know as well as I do, there is vast miles of area that still don't have cell service. I mean,
Right.
you come
Well,
up from Lajitas to Marathon,
Right.
and
Well,
you're
right.
driving 250 miles with no cell
Right.
service.
Heck, I can't get a signal out here at Costco.
Right. Well, you know, maybe there's some printed materials, but I'm just saying that, you know, some bias training across the state that's uniform can be something that, even if you have the 1 to 10 and the 10 to 1,000, or 10 to, you know, 250 to 1,000 and 1,000 and above, there should be some uniformity in how we interact with citizens. And I think that, with the use of force issues that we've talked about, we should be able to make improvements for everyone. And that doesn't mean you're going to see a black citizen in Texas driving to El Paso all the time. That's not probably, I'm a Southwest Airlines guy. I don't have the appreciation of being in a vehicle that long. So my point is, can we get to a point somehow, some way, even if it's an annual meeting of folks for TMPA, for CLEAT, for DPSOA, that has some uniformity to it, so we can expose people to that? Because I think exposing differences of people and thoughts and ideas have helped us get to where we are and get momentum in what we do every morning on Wednesdays. So if we can kind of do that same thing with the masses, and then also on the flip side, we would need to educate the community at large. I think we're starting to now gather more people to be inclusive of what we can do as opposed to not. And I think that's one of the primary goals that I would hope that we could see by taking the time out and doing these things.
Sorry, go ahead, Kerry.
I was just going to say, I can tell you that in my agency, and any police officer that's been through a basic TCOL approved academy, somewhere in that training, they have learned, we call it a 7-step violator contact. It may have different terminology through different agencies. And I can tell you, in my 38 years as a trooper, if what I find is that troopers that follow that 7-step violator contact versus troopers that don't follow it, generally are your ones that receive the most complaints. It's non-invasive. It's very businesslike, and generally when they sway from that is when they get into trouble. When you're talking about getting stopped.
And
Well, and I tell you what, I've been stopped by troopers in various places, and I can tell you, everyone has been on point. I have not had any incident going to Houston, going to Dallas, wherever, anyone that has been, I think, egregiously, overbearing by any stretch of the imagination. And I've driven throughout the state, for a long time now. So that is a testament. I think I've run into, have followed your protocol. I'm sorry.
And I will tell you, the 7-step violator contact works great if you're a DPS trooper. But there are agencies that work in a political environment where it's really not the best. If you're a school resource officer, an ISD officer, you work at a hospital district, the 7-step violator contact is going to cause you more trouble than what it's going to, solve for you. You have to be much more personal. The 7-step violator contact includes always using the word you and never using the word I. If you work in a different political environment, you need to be more personal. I don't mean this to sound harsh, but more personable than if you're a trooper working on Interstate 45 around, I don't know, Buffalo, Texas. It's
I've taken complaints from people who said, "Well, your trooper was rude." I'm like, "Okay, well, what did he say?" Well, he told me I was speeding. Okay, and then what did he say? Well, he told me I was going to get a ticket. I'm like, all right, then what happened next? Well, he gave me the ticket. Okay, well, that's a 7-step violator contact. And then after that, what did he do? He left.
And I promise you, the city of Pflugerville Police Department trains their officers to be much more personable. They want much more of a community type based policing system, which is why they've got an 85 or 90% approval rating, you know, because they do have that personal interaction with their citizens, and it's a lot more crucial, you know, in an environment like that. So while we understand and we appreciate and we encourage a uniformity in the way law enforcement does their jobs, we also have to understand that there's just different climates, different environments that law enforcement officers from different agencies are involved in.
Right. And so what you have, and absolutely agree, if you have a citizen that may come from a different socioeconomic, different neighborhood understanding, and sometimes you have this, it's like, how do you create rain? The cold front hits the warm front, and you know the weather pattern creates precipitation. That's what I'm saying. We recognize that those incidents are going to happen. So how do we proactively notify both that, listen, not everything when they interact makes a Reese's peanut butter cup that millions are sold. Sometimes you get thunder and rain and lightning, and that's not the same type of outcome as a popular selling, you know, delectable. And so, you know, and there's no perfect way of doing that, but notice to the citizens and interacting may help afford to maybe not come in the contact in the same way. At least in Clay's scenario, no one's hurt. They may be a little sore about getting a ticket, but no one's hurt. And I think, as rightfully so, public safety is something that we're after. If in fact we'd have to look at numbers of being a little higher for different groups, but nobody hurt, I think that's a very different fact pattern than people getting hurt and people wondering why they're getting hurt.
And as we've talked about, we strongly believe that law enforcement needs to do, and I hesitate to even say a better job, because I don't think we've done a good job to start with of interacting with our citizens, that, you know, the communities that we serve. I don't think we've done anywhere near the level of educating, of informing our citizenry about why law enforcement does what we do the way we do it.
Right.
You know, we've talked about it before. Law enforcement tends to build up these walls, and then when we have a focusing event, a critical incident where, you know, the public needs to be informed better about what happened as much as we possibly can, we don't. We, you know, for whatever reason, and I still like to blame it on the lawyers.
But again, but Kevin, you set a scenario: build a wall, come behind the wall, and all of a sudden there's an incident. That is not going to be a great fact pattern of comfort for the people in the community.
Yeah, it's not. We need for the citizens, the voters, the community to understand why we do things the way we do them up front before those events happen. And when those events do happen, we need to be out in front of it as much as we can, informing the public. This is what we can tell you. This is what has happened. Again, there's still a lot of investigation to be done. There's still a long way to go before we have all the facts and all the different stuff that goes into one of these. But here's what we can tell you right now, and we will continually update you as much as we possibly can. We do a lousy job of that.
Yeah.
For the most part, there are some departments that do a lot better than others, but for the most
part, so can that at least be a starting point for the one-person department, as well as something that looks like the city of Houston? Because I think, you know, just when Nikki and I were talking offline before we came to meet with y'all, there's that disconnect that she uses. I think it's prevalent in the example you're speaking about, and that disconnect is getting people, you know, bigger and bigger divide between entities that shouldn't or not necessarily need to have that type of divide.
Right. And the more that the only contact our citizens have with law enforcement is when law enforcement is in an actual enforcement capacity, the worse that disconnect is going to be. And remember, Fred said,
and we're talking.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring that up last week. Yeah, what he said and how you don't have the resources for it.
Right.
And
or he just wants to police. You just can't police, because I think when you just only police, you still are seen as this entity that's not part like Pflugerville's police force is. And you have to, again, find a balance between let us do our job and maybe redirecting resources to other components that can better do that. But you still have to have a recognition of public safety officers, of law enforcement in a positive way, not only when, something bad occurs, because it seems like they're a referee of sorts in the community. And, I'm not a fan of referees when it comes to sports, but if you can have an interaction with these guys as you're moving through life or through a game, and I know sometimes I always say a football game is a microcosm of the world, the better interaction you have with that officiating crew, I think that we're gonna need to do something that would be a positive thing. Let me do this. Nikki, I know you had, and I really appreciate this, when we first started, there were some specific cases, and I know you have some comments. And listen, Kevin, and the audience and all the folks on the law enforcement side, we're going to have varying views, and we all have varying experiences and perspectives. And Nikki, I want you, because I know we're running up against 11, but give us a couple of thoughts of yours, and then a couple of the 2-3 cases that we can kind of pinpoint for the next opportunity to meet, please.
For the next opportunity to meet, let me, what I don't want to pinpoint the cases right now,
Okay.
because I think but what I'll do is I'll send an email, and what we'll do is we'll go backwards, so that way we have some context. Some of these cases have maybe already been decided, and that would be easier because you'll have more information. But like we said at the beginning of our discussion, and as Kevin stated, I mean, we see in the media what's happening. I mean, we just had a shooting this weekend in Wolf City, right? But it seems to be every time, people are wanting to progress and to move forward, we hear about a shooting. And Kevin, which rightfully pointed out, that it's not that, it's in between the time that these shootings are happening. They're happening every day, every minute. Not necessarily with police, police brutality, just in general, in this line of work. And so that's something that we have to be mindful of. There's a lot that goes into it. But at some point we have to say there's something that's broken, right? Something's broken, something's not right. And I think that we would be remiss if we didn't at least address those topics when we're talking. And so what I'll do, just so that we're all fair, because it's already 11 o'clock, and if I start getting into this conversation,
right? No.
It's gonna be hard for me to stop.
Just wanted to preface it. And again, we, Rudy, you, myself, and then Kevin, Clay, Travis, and Fred and Doug, we're all going to have our own perspectives within our groups. And I want, because, and again, transparency, Kevin, when we kind of powwow, I'll say it, sometimes I feel that Nikki gets a little discouraged. I feel that, and maybe she comes from the motherly perspective as a woman. I don't want to put words in her mouth or anything like that. I kind of look at it as just a strict process. I do have feelings and emotions, but I'm a big Spock supporter on Star Trek. We got to logically get better so that the issues don't keep arising. But I understand that things happen in real time, and we're working on them, but they still occur, as you mentioned, Nikki, every day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that email then. One question I would have is, would we want to put that out on the notice so everybody knows what cases we're going to be talking about? Or
Yeah, we can do that. And so I will make it my responsibility to get that to you by end of today. So that gives us a full week, and it gives everybody an opportunity. I'm sure y'all have people that are watching that'll be very interested in that. They can add, comments, but we want to make sure, because I don't want to speculate. I've learned in the last year or so that it's never good to speculate. And number two, we don't want to have anybody give out some commentary that could be misconstrued, especially when there are different facts. that are out there, and the investigation is not complete. So what I would like to do is, we got plenty of cases to choose from. That's the sad part. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we provide some context with those, so that way people are able to look it up. And we'll just do, and one thing I want to preface, like Stephen said, we're all coming from this from different views. I do come from it from the aspect of a mother. I have a brother, just, in general. And we want to make sure that we are not leading our arguments with emotions. That's the first thing as an attorney. And, it's just in civil discussion, you can't lead with emotions. And so I agree with that. It's not about that. It's just simply going to be an unbiased, conversation on some things that I see, or questions, what could have been done differently. And with you guys having the experience, you can tell us, what would you would have trained, or if you had to deal with that situation in your force, or just from your perspective as in your leadership with the police department or in the police force, how would you have looked at it? And we'll use some of the older ones that are out there.
Fair enough. Well, then we will look forward to this week.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
y'all.
All right.
Everybody have a good day. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right.